Hello there Scapers, my name is Xenavilius and welcome to my full analysis of Precise and Equilibrium, a perk combination for the ages as far as DPS is concerned. They've both had a long and rich history in Perkscape, with Precise holding the upper hand for half the time and then Equilibrium coming into play once they fixed the interplay between Precise and Equilibrium for both to be combined to make some of the best weapon DPS perks. So in this video I'm going to be focusing on Precise 4 and Equilibrium 2, the best combination you can get with a lot of blood, sweat and tears and GP spent. But at the end of it I will also be looking at a few tidbits such as the chance of getting it, chance of going dry, and the famed, mysterious and extremely difficult to get Precise 5 Equilibrium 1, and is it even worth it? So this video is going to be in two parts. The first part is going to look at how you get the perk. The second part is going to look at its rivals in terms of DPS and compare a bunch of different combinations. So let's get right into it. The drop rate is uncertain. A lot of people have said it's 1 in 1000. There's some tests taken place and they've said it's 1 in 2000. Some people have said it's 1 in 500 like me, which seems to be wrong. But what I'm going to do is assume it's 1 in 1000 and go ahead from there. So what you need for 1000 tries, wow, 1000 tries, you're really going in hard, aren't you? What you need is 10,000 blade parts, 5,000 crafted parts, 5,000 precise components and 2,000 strong components. Now the tricky part for most people is getting the 5,000 precise components and possibly the 2,000 strong components. That's probably the trickiest part. If you do want to get this perk, I wouldn't even recommend dreaming about trying it until you're 120 invention, because your chance of getting it is at a maximum when you're at 120 invention, and even better if you can use the skill kit boost to boost it to 121. So by the time you get there, you probably gathered quite a few of all of them, but especially quite a few of the parts, the common components. The precise and strong components are uncommon components, if you like. So the chances are you have gathered quite a bit, but assuming you're going to be starting from scratch, well, let's have a look. So this beauty is called the Magic Shield Bow, and if you disassemble it, which I did 26,000 of them, costing me 24.7 mil, this is what you get. You get 3,931 strong components, which means they cost you 6.61 magic shield bows per strong components at a cost of 6.3k. Or if you want to talk in terms of how many gizmos this many magic shield bows will make, 26,000 magic shield bows will make 1,965 weapon gizmo shells. So that's another way of looking at it. And as far as precise components are concerned, you'll get 6k precise components, which means with 26k magic shield bows you'll get 1,234 attempts at P4E2, if you like. P4E2 requires you to fill all 5 slots of a weapon gizmo shell with precise components. Now the interesting two numbers are the ones in the brackets in red. What this basically says is how many magic shield bows you need to attempt P4E2 once. You need 21. Just over 21 basically. That's all it says, and that will cost you 20k almost exactly. Now this assumes of course that you have all the blade and crafted parts you require, which you may or may not have, like I said. If you don't have any of them, well, this is the flip side. So I'm going to be using rune spears. There are a number of different items you can use, but rune spears are one of the best items if you balance out the number of components you get per rune spear as well as its cost, so not being too expensive. So it's one of my favorite items. There's also another reason, but these are the two main reasons. So from a test of 1500 rune spears, note the difference between the test, 26k magic shield bows, 1500 rune spears. Well, it turns out that the limiting factor here is blade parts. What do I mean by limiting factor? Well, you need 10 blade parts to make a weapon gizmo shell, but you only need 5 crafted parts. You get about the same number of blade parts as crafted parts, but you need twice as many blade parts. So that is a limiting factor. That's what we need to work with. And it turns out you need 4.47 rune spears to make one weapon gizmo shell if you count this limiting factor of blade parts, which will cost you 50k. So that's the important number, 50k GP or 4.47 rune spears per weapon gizmo shell made. Now the interesting thing about rune spears, which is also one of the reasons I like them, is that they also give precise components at a very low rate. At 21 rune spears required for one precise component for one P4E2 attempt, or 4.24 rune spears for every precise component. So it's not exactly the most efficient way of getting precise components, but it is a bonus if you think about it in those terms. It is a bit of a bonus. It will take some cost off your overall cost of making a P4E2. So if you summarize all these numbers, this is what you get. So to make 1000 P4E2, to attempt P4E2 1000 times, you will need the following. Given the numbers I talked about earlier, just multiply by 1000. So 21k magic shield bows, 4.47k rune spears. To disassemble all of them, well, that's going to take you a combined total of 8.5 hours, guys. Yeah. 8.5 hours to disassemble 25k items. Or if you use a machine, the auto disassembler, Mark 2, that will take you about 17 days. Because it disassembles stuff 50 times slower than you would. So I wouldn't recommend using them. It also costs a bit of money to use a machine, but if you have other stuff to do, then obviously go ahead and use the machine if you're willing to pay that extra money. Now, if you do the calculation based on how many precise components get refunded, if you like, or reimbursed by using rune spears, well, you get refunded 4.4k magic shield bows worth of precise components. So you save 4.2 mil and 1.5 hours of disassembly time. So all in all, happy days. Rune spears are the way to go. So in total, if you do the maths, 25k items will cost you about 65.5 mil with today's prices, which is 950 GP per magic shield bow and 11k per rune spear. That will take 7 hours to disassemble and about an hour and a half to attempt P4E2 1000 times, based on how long it took me. A rough estimate, but an estimate nevertheless. So 1000 tries will take you 8.5 hours and will cost you 65.5 mil. Or another 2 mil if you want to use machines to do the legwork for you. This is only for 1000 tries. Remember that very, very carefully. I'm going to come back to drop chances at the end, but this is only for 1000 tries. If you get unlucky, maybe more, maybe less. So this is an average. It will fluctuate hugely based on your luck. So don't take it too much to heart. And if indeed the drop chance of P4E2 is 1 in 2000, not 1 in 1000, well, you double all these numbers, so it'll cost you 131 mil per try, 17 hours, and you will have to disassemble 51k components. Yes, that is exactly what I just said, and you may well be unlucky. So one final point is that if you only need one of these 3 different types of components or 4 different types of components, and you don't want to spend that much money disassembling, say, a magic shield bow or a rune spear, then there are cheaper alternatives such as the salamanders. They're really hard to buy off the GE though, but if you do manage to get them, they are a very cheap but quick alternative, very efficient alternative to crafted pots. If you just want blade pots, you can disassemble adamant 2H swords or rune 2H swords. So there are lots of options available for you. And remember that disassembling rune spears and magic shield bows will also give you other components for some of the other perks you may wish to make, and that's the beauty of invention. Well, I say beauty, that's debatable. In general, whenever you disassemble something, you will always get items that you might need to make a different perk. So do check out my Perkscape video that I made with all the best invention perks. It's a bit outdated, but most of it still holds true. And time to move on to the second part. In this second part, we're going to have a look at Precise on its own, Equilibrium on its own, and the combination of the two, which gives you the optimal DPS. So look at how these perks affect your DPS, what stuff you can change in order to work out the optimal combination, and also see whether it's worth your time, whether you think it's worth spending all that money for the various levels of increased DPS. So Precise, well, the basis of the Precise perk is that it is based on one thing and one thing only, the ratio of your ability damage between the minimum damage and the maximum damage. So each ability has a specific range of damage. If you hover your mouse over it, it will tell you, and that's exactly what it's based on. Equilibrium, on the other hand, it's a bit more complicated. It's based on the range of your damage, so the actual difference between maximum and minimum, not the ratio between maximum and minimum. So for example, Precise would only be based on your ratio, so minimum of 30 and a maximum of 150 would be no different for the Precise perk than an ability with a minimum of 50 and a maximum of 250. However, this would have a different range for the Equilibrium perk to work with. 150 minus 30 is 120 for the first one. That's a smaller range than 250 minus 50, 200 for the second one. So it's a bit more complicated for Equilibrium. If you want to look at Precise and Equilibrium in one gizmo, which is what this video is mainly about anyway, Precise for Equilibrium 2, well, you got to mix those two together to work out the outcomes. So now that we know how these perks work, let's have a look at Precise 5 then. If you put all the numbers in, this is what you get. So for Shadow Tendrils has got the biggest minimum to maximum ratio of 1 to 7.58. Therefore, as you would expect, it has the biggest DPS increase using Precise 5. When I say DPS increase, I'm comparing it to if you didn't have any perks at all. So yeah, the most common ratio, I guess, for abilities is 1 to 5, and you might have seen this number thrown around quite a lot, 6.25%. So if you use an ability which has a 1 to 5 ratio, for example Destroy, which does indeed have a 1 to 5 ratio, your DPS will increase by 6.25% on average. Detonate is 1 to 3.5, so it's slightly lower. And Snapshot is pretty interesting. The first hit has a very small ratio. It's only between 100 and 120% of ability damage, but the second hit has a much bigger ratio. So you can see the effects of Precise 5 on those two. And this is what the graph looks like. So I've just graphed the formulas, and as you can see, there is a general trend that the higher the ratio of ability damage, the higher the increase in average ability damage due to Precise 5. This is only for a 100% minimum damage ability, so the ratio that you see on the bottom is for an ability with 100 minimum, 200 maximum, 100 minimum, 300 maximum, 100 minimum, 400 maximum, and so on. But it doesn't matter because Precise 5 doesn't care what your minimum ability damage is. All it cares about is your ratio, so it could be for any range whatsoever. And as you can see, it rises very quickly as your ratio increases, but then as your ratio keeps increasing, it slows down. And I guess it peaks at around 7 point something. It flatlines there, and the ratio of ability damage won't go beyond 8 for any ability in game right now. So the peak you're going to get is about 6.5 to 7% increase in ability damage with Precise 5. As I talked about, with Equilibrium 3, the situation is slightly more complicated. The basis, like I said, is that the bigger the damage range, the better the DPS increase with Equilibrium. So with Equilibrium 3, these are the figures. So the average DPS increase with Shadow Tendrils will be 4.6% because that's a difference of 217% between maximum and minimum. With Destroy, it's only 150.4%, so the DPS increase is not as high, but still pretty good, 3.96. And with Detonate, here's an interesting scenario. So with Detonate, what happens is you have two things going on. Detonate has a pretty high minimum damage as well as a reasonably high range. And if you do the maths for Equilibrium, it turns out that it's affected by two things. It's mainly affected by the range of ability damage, like I said. So the graph on the left is basically showing you what the same graph for Precise showed you, which is a general increase in ability damage as your range increases. But again, there is diminishing returns, not as pronounced as before, but as your range increases more and more, your increase in average ability damage becomes bigger by a smaller and smaller amount, if you know what I mean, as you can see. But that is only for 100% minimum damage ability. So the figure on the left shows you the increase in average ability damage for an ability with a minimum damage of 100%. So as you can see in the bottom, it's showing you an ability with a minimum of 100 and a maximum of 150, minimum of 100, maximum of 200, maximum of 250, maximum of 300, and so on. That's fixed. Now, if you look at it the other way, where you fix the range, but you change the minimum, well, it gets pretty interesting, because if you fix the range to say 80% and you change the starting damage, it turns out that the smaller your starting damage, the bigger your increase, which is why with Detonate, because it's got a pretty high starting damage of 100%, even though the range is pretty big, 100 to 350% is 250%, it's not quite as high a DPS increase as for Tendrils. So there's a couple of things happening here. So all I'll say is Equilibrium works better for abilities with 1, a bigger range, but also with 2, a smaller starting damage. The best abilities for Equilibrium 3 would be abilities with a small starting damage and a big range, which is exactly what Shadow Tendrils is. Starts at 33%, maximum of 250%, which is why it's probably the best use case of Equilibrium 3. Now, bringing everything together, I'm going to show you the effects of different abilities on your overall DPS increase from different combinations of Precise and Equilibrium. Firstly, credit goes to Chipapa, who made this Google sheet, and I've just modified it slightly to show you guys. He's used the same formulas I have. I used those formulas to make graphs. He's used them in a table. I'm just going to show you which is the best combination between P4E2 and P5E1. Now, P5E1 is a very, very rare and much harder to get perk in a single gizmo, but it can be better in certain situations. Before we get into it though, remember that if you cannot get Aftershock 3, which has a few requirements, then you don't even need to go any further. Just get Precise 5 on one weapon gizmo and Equilibrium 3 on the other, and that will give you the best DPS on your weapons until you unlock Aftershock 3. If you do have Aftershock 3 though, that's when you have to make a decision between P4E2 and P5E1, or just P5 and P4E2. That's probably the most likely debate you're having. Is it really worth it for me to attempt P4E2? Let's start with a basic ability, Slice. It has a minimum damage of 30% of your ability damage and a maximum of 120. What does that come out to? Well, without any perks, let's say the base is 0%. As you can see, the best combination is obviously P5E3, but you can't get that in one gizmo. The best you can get in one gizmo is P4E2 or P5E1. And P5E1 is actually better. Why is that? Well, when you combine 2 perks in one gizmo, Precise gets applied first and then Equilibrium. Now, Precise, like I mentioned earlier, is affected by the ratio of ability damage, minimum to maximum. It doesn't care about what your absolute values are, 30%, 300%, whatever, it could be anything. However, Equilibrium is only effective if you have a low starting damage and you have a high range. Now, we do have a low starting damage, fine, but our range is only 90. That's why P5E1 is ever so slightly better than P4E2. It's 1 in 1300 times better, 0.08% better than P4E2. Whether that makes it better overall, well, it will be difficult to say. Let's have a look at a different ability. Let's have a look at Shadow Tendrils. Now, the way Shadow Tendrils works is quite involved. It has 5 different hits, which have different proc chances each, but the basis is that each of these hits has a minimum of 33% of your ability damage and a maximum of 250%, which is a huge range. So this makes it very effective with Equilibrium, and it's also very good with Precise because of the ratio being 1 to 7.5, like we talked about. Therefore, P4E2 is more effective because you have Equilibrium 2 in that. You only have Equilibrium 1 in P5E1, and Equilibrium is much more effective for this ability. Therefore, P4E2 is better. But how often are you really going to use Shadow Tendrils compared to Slice? I know a lot of people don't use Slice. You probably shouldn't use Slice unless you are attacking a stunnable monster, but it was just an example. In this case, P4E2 is 0.13% better in terms of DPS than P5E1. Notice through all this that the best obviously is P5E3, but if you add Aftershock 3 to P5, P4E2 and P5E1 just for comparison, you'll see that you can increase the overall DPS by about 3%. Aftershock is about 3% extra DPS. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. It's not as clear cut as that, but it is about 3% extra DPS. So with P4E2 and Aftershock, you'll have 11% overall DPS, which is still pretty good. I mean, P5E3 is pretty close to that. So if you don't have Aftershock 3, all is not lost. P5E3 is still a very good combination. And finally, I just want to look at an ability where there is literally nothing separating P4E2 and P5E1. That ability is Destroy. It has a minimum damage of 37.6% and a maximum of 188%, a 1:5 ratio and a difference of 150.4%. As you can see, there is nothing separating P4E2 and P5E1. Absolutely nothing. Well, they might be like a millionth of a percent or something silly like that. But the point is that at the end of the day, P5E1 and P4E2 are better for different abilities, and without actually going into the insane amounts of maths required to work out the average across a Berserk or a Sunshine rotation or something like that, I would say it's definitely not worth going for P5E1. Firstly, it's going to cost so much more because you need either 1 or 2 armored components combined with 3 or 4 precise components in a weapon gizmo shell. And that's going to cost you a hell of a lot of money, let me tell you. It is definitely possible, as you can see in this picture. That's not mine, by the way. But it's going to cost you bank. So unless you have a lot of armored components knocking about to give it a try, I would not recommend it. But what you've been able to see through this analysis is that P4E2 is consistently 1% or more better than P5. In this case, it's 1.2% better. So that's a reasonably big difference, I suppose. Actually, let's increase the decimal points. I want to see what the difference is for this case between the two. Oh, there's nothing separating them. Absolutely nothing. There is nothing separating them, guys. Anyway, as I was saying, I would definitely go for P4E2 for that 1.2 or 1% increased DPS if you can afford it, if you have the time. The money isn't that bad, I suppose, unless you get really lucky. And talking about luck, let's have a quick look at the chance of you getting P4E2 across different streaks. So I have 2 versions here, if the drop rate was 1 in 1000 and if it was 1 in 2000. I have no idea what exactly it is. A lot of people have said 1 in 1000, a lot of people have said 1 in 2000. Jagex haven't released the official figures yet. But if it was 1 in 1000, you'd only have a 10% chance of getting it within 100 gizmos. If you did 500 in a row, you would have a 39% chance of getting it. If you did 1000, and I found this really interesting, you'd only have a 63.2% chance of getting it. I would have thought it'd be a lot higher, because if something is 1 in 1k chance of dropping and you do it 1k times, surely it's more than a 63% chance of you getting it at some point within those 1k attempts. Anyway, that is something interesting statistically. As you go up more and more to say, so for 5,000 and 10,000, I've shown you the chance of you not getting it. And as you can see, you'd have to be pretty damn unlucky not to get it within 10,000. 1 in 22k chance of you not getting it, assuming the drop rate is 1 in 1k. Now, I think someone called Base Tank tested P4E2's 22.4k times and he got 12. So that's a pretty decent sample size to suggest that the drop rate of P4E2 is 1 in 2k on average. If it is, well, you're staring down the barrel, guys. You really are. So double all the numbers I showed you in part 1. It's going to cost you 133 mil per gizmo on average. And if you go unlucky, well, it's not unreasonable for you to go 5k attempts dry at P4E2. Only 1 in 12 chance of that happening. And if you're really feeling unlucky, well, it's only a 1 in 149 chance of you going 10k dry for P4E2. So it's not that unreasonable to think that you will go dry. So just be warned. Although on the flip side, you could be pretty lucky and get it within a few hundred, or even on your first try. That would be something, wouldn't it? So yeah, guys, that's pretty much my analysis. I hope you enjoyed it and it helped you make a decision on which one to go for. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comment section below and give it a like, because it took me a long time to research and put it together. I do have plans to make more in the future, but if you guys didn't find it useful, I won't think about investing the time and effort to make these kinds of videos, although I did really enjoy making them. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know which one you have, whether you have P4E2, P5E1, how many tries it took you, and I will see you in the next one.